Like the office they commemorate, presidential libraries are living institutions. Certainly it is my hope that the Reagan Library will become a dynamic intellectual forum where scholars interpret the past and policymakers debate the future.
Welcome to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute's virtual event series. To fulfill President Reagan's mission of making the Reagan Library a dynamic intellectual forum, our Center for Public Affairs Programming offers lectures and forums presenting perspectives on important public policy issues of the day. Each year, we bring you 20 to 30 events from politicians, authors, members of the media, business and military leaders, and more. Since the March 2020 closure of many businesses across our great country, the Reagan Foundation is now bringing its events online to ensure that we are still delivering world-class content, even if you can't get to our hilltop to watch it in person. In this week's Center for Public Affairs virtual event, we bring you political activist and social media star Candace Owens for a conversation on her brand new book, Blackout: How Black America Can Make Its Second Escape from the Democrat Plantation. Candace Owens is the founder of the Blexit Foundation. She is also the host of the Candace Owens Show on PragerU, which airs every other Sunday. In describing herself, she has said, "Choosing to think has been one of the most transformative secrets of my life. It's brought me closer to others and has opened the world up to me in a way that I never knew was possible. I believe if we can turn the dial on the way people view themselves, we can change the world instantly, for the better. I am a fighter, and right now I'm fighting for the heart and soul of a country I love." She joins us today to discuss her book, Blackout, which she says lays bare the myth that all Black people should vote Democrat, and shows why turning to the right will leave them happier, more successful, and more self-sufficient. We now invite you to enjoy our virtual program, coming to you from our Air Force One Pavilion Leadership Academy Oval Office with Candace Owens and Reagan Foundation and Institute Executive Director John Highbush.
Candace Owens, it is a delight to have you with us at the Reagan Library. Not physically, maybe you'll make it out here at some point after this virus, but just wonderful to have you with us today.
Thank you for letting me join.
Yeah, and a wonderful book. I finished it just a couple of days ago, and it's a page turner. You know, when you see Candace Owens on television, she's not able to necessarily tell her whole story in interviews, but this was a lot of fun to read and really educational too.
Thank you, and you're exactly right about interview snippets, and that was sort of the frustration that I was having in the first couple of years, was feeling like the media was sort of making a caricature of Candace Owens, and people really had no idea who I was or what I was, and they had sort of reduced me to a couple of clicks, and I really wanted to sort of get out in front of it and give people something concrete so that they would say, okay, now I know why she stands on this platform and this platform. So that was exactly the reason why I wrote it.
Yeah, well done. It was neat reading about your background, childhood, how you grew up, and I see that your family played obviously an important role, as they always do, but your grandfather in particular seemed to have a real impact on your life.
Still does. It's actually one of the things known in my family is I'm definitely a bull and I'm super stubborn, but the only person that can really reduce me in 5 seconds and then make me change my position on something is my grandfather. I care deeply about what his opinion is, and it just comes from a place of utmost respect. My grandmother, as you learned in the book, passed in 2013, but it was similar, and they've sort of had that profound effect on me, my sisters, and my first cousins. They really are just the most incredible human beings I've ever known, are my grandparents.
Yeah, and your grandfather's a real disciplinarian. I don't mean in a too overly strict sense, but the influence he had on how you carry yourself and the way you acted really seems to have been profound and important.
Yeah, and the funny thing about that is you don't realize it as it's happening. Obviously, when you're a child and he's got all these rules, and it's just granddad's got rules and rules and rules. And we never felt, he was always so kind. And my sisters and I still reminisce about the ways that he would discipline us. He always used a story or a prayer. That was sort of his mechanism. And the same with my grandmother. I've never known them to raise their voices, and yet they were able to They could reduce us to tears with the
Yeah.
Bible
Yeah.
scripture, you know,
Just by a look, I'm sure, right?
yes, yeah, and that's a quiet power, and that's a power that can only be garnered when people deeply respect you, right? You know,
Yeah,
they
that's
don't
right.
rule with fear; they ruled with love and respect. And it shaped me. They put those early seeds in, and then when I became an adult, I realized, wait, something they did there was right. Something made sense in that household. There was structure and there were rules, and it wasn't a form of bondage. It was a way to free myself and become a better person.
Sure. Now, you didn't come out of the crib as some right-wing Republican. You weren't conservative in your philosophy, I don't think, as a youth, as most aren't. When did the switch go on for you where you gained a perspective on life that you're now, that is running through you to this day?
Yeah. So to start answering this question, the first thing that's very necessary is to separate conservatism from republicanism. So my grandparents were deeply conservative, but completely apolitical. Actually, they were so conservative that they view the political sphere as a form of secularism that should be rejected. So that's the irony. So I did not grow up with any political leanings outside of what was shaped for me in the school system. And that's what sort of formed my idea that because I was Black, I had to be a Democrat. Because I was Black, I had to be a liberal, and that Republicans were awful and they were racist. So I felt that way when I was leaving high school, but I actively learned that in the school system, which I talk a lot about in one chapter, because people are being actively taught, anti-Americanism, and I started to turn the bend on that as an adult. I sort of woke up one day after my grandmother died and realized that I was just sort of miserable, these ideas of freedom, whether you're learning feminism in college, which I was learning in college, and, it's love and rock and roll and whatever you want to do, and everything's subjective and rules don't need anything. It's all about you coming into your own. And then you sort of realize that you're not really happy. You're not really fulfilled. These things don't actually give you any meaning. And there was something about my grandmother's death, which happened in 2013, which inspired me to want to take more control in my life and to become a better person. And then in terms of politics, when Donald Trump came down 2 years later in 2015, and the media was instantly calling him a racist, and which is funny, I didn't support him when he first went on the escalator. I thought he was too bombastic, too loud, would just the wrong decorum for the White House. But I was shocked to see the media, as opposed to just saying he was ill qualified, to call him a racist. He had been in the media, a known person in the media for decades. He had never faced that accusation. And then they went to white supremacist, and then they went to a misogynist and a sexist. So for me, it just defied common sense. And I just thought to myself, am I being manipulated emotionally? And I felt very strongly that I was. And I just started digging and looking at perspectives that I would have normally dismissed because of my educational upbringing as race traders and Uncle Toms and coons. And I started turning to, most notably, Thomas Sowell, which there's a lot of Thomas Sowell quotations or papers that are quoted in my book for that reason, because he changed my life. Larry Elder, who's now a mentor to me, one of the most brilliant men who I'm lucky to learn under. And these people, I had an awakening, and I went, oh my God, the truth has been there the whole time, but I've been diluted by the mainstream media and the educational agenda.
Yeah, I've had the chance to spend a few minutes during interviews with Larry, and you're absolutely right. I mean, what a force he is. The title of the book, Blackout. Okay, just define it for us. What does blackout mean?
So I kind of, initially we had thought, do we name it Blexit? Because that's sort of the name of my movement. It's Black Exit. But at the time when I started crafting this book, I had just started the Blexit movement, didn't really have the familiarity that we thought could carry the book. And then we started tossing around some ideas, and sort of the idea of a blackout, Black people having double entendre of Black people removing themselves out of this progressive narrative, this ill-informed narrative that does nothing but lead to aggressive results for the Black community. And that's sort of where we arrived at. And it just felt right. As soon as I said blackout, I just said, that's it. That's what I want to do. And then, of course, the subtitle, which was extremely controversial. I had to fight for that subtitle at Simon and Schuster. They were like, no, no, no. And I mean, the entire book was an uphill battle and a fight with Simon Schuster. But, I am who I am unapologetically. And I meant for the subtitle to be How Black America Can Make Its Second Escape from a Democrat Plantation. And I spent an entire chapter on slavery, really just sort of defining for people exactly what I meant when I said a second escape from the Democrat plantations.
Yeah, in fact, that was exactly what I was going to ask you next. Okay, so go into that a little bit. A second escape from a plantation. Just lay it out.
Yeah, so the first escape, I mean, the reason why you say second escape is just to remind people that when Black Americans were enslaved, we were enslaved by Democrats. These were the Democrats that enslaved us, the Democrats that segregated us, the Democrats that fought to keep us under the Jim Crow laws. And in my opinion, it is these Democrats that are using that same exact system with the same exact rules to enslave Black minds today. So while the abuses are not physical, while we are not physically enslaved, we are mentally enslaved. And that comes because of the education system. You'll hear politicians talk about voter suppression and Black Americans are suffering because of this ill or that ill, and they'll never talk to you about education. And we know that in order for slave owners to maintain a plantation, one of the most crucial laws rather, not rules, was that Black Americans weren't allowed to learn to read. And I highlight this in my book that we have a severe literacy problem within Black America. 75% of Black boys in California can't pass a basic literacy exam. Across 5 schools in Baltimore, they couldn't find a single Black child that was proficient in reading and writing and mathematics. This is a real issue, and the reason why it's an issue and why the Democrats were brilliant in making that a law back then is because that that an educated mind cannot be enslaved. If the slaves of yesteryear were educated and were able to read the abolitionist papers coming up from north, they would have said, oh, there's a whole different system available for us up north. And perhaps we can leave and we should try to escape, or they could understand what they were reading, look at maps, and then follow certain readings. Frederick Douglass, for example, all of that was stripped from them because it allowed Democrats to create, which I refer to in my book as Plato's allegory of the cave, to create a different reality for them, to tell them what's important, to make this the new normal, which is why so many slaves never even attempted to escape the plantations, because this was all they ever knew. And I see that methodology being created again by the left, by the Democrat Party, this idea of harping on victim narratives for things that we are not being victimized by, while we turn the other cheek and ignore the things that we are being blatantly victimized by, like the education system, like the systemic breakdown of family, which I go into in another chapter on family, and understanding how all of these things at the end of the day make it impossible for Black Americans to move forward. And in my opinion, that is the Machiavellian design of the Democrat Party.
I want to go back to victimhood in a minute, but let me ask you, you quoted an extraordinary speech that, as you defined it, I think in your book, a speech of Obama's, President Obama, from 2008, I think it was. And it was, to me, the question is kind of like a Nixon goes to China moment. How is it possible that under the first Black American president, after giving a speech like he did, for him to not have done something more to try to tackle this issue of Black families and fatherless families and the vast majority of Black kids growing up without a father? Why was that not actually pressed during the Obama administration in your mind?
In my opinion, Obama was an incredible spokesperson. I mean, I think he is a great orator, and that's why America fell in love with him in the first place. But he was not a man that was in control. I think he took a lot of favors to get into the White House, and he owed a lot of favors while he was there, and he still owes a lot of favors. I don't believe, even in this current climate, that he is a person that supports Joe Biden. I think he does what he has to do And so he had no real power while he was in there, and I don't think he had any real interest. I think it's one of the biggest problems with Washington, D.C., is the amount of money that surrounds Washington, D.C., and the various interests, separate interests that people have. And there is no interests on the left in terms of educating in a group, because if you really seek to have control, you don't want that group to be educated. In fact, what we're seeing right now is that they've taken that methodology and now they're applying it to every group in America. They don't want anyone to be educated. They're replacing hard academics in our school, like engineering and mathematics, with psychological conditioning, emotional training. Kids are learning about Black Lives Matter and white privilege, which teaches them what? Nothing. How to be emotional, how to keep up toddler antics, how to come out of school a whiny Marxist. But they're not learning anything of real value or real substance, and they're setting themselves up for failure. They don't know that. They're being set up for failure, and then when they fail, they're going to turn around and they're going to blame the very same system that forced their failure in the first place, and on goes the hamster wheel.
You have a really terrific, clever quote in the book. I had to laugh when I say you wrote, "Being a victim is the new black," right? Explain that.
Yeah, it's fashionable. Everyone's looking for a way to be a victim. People are actually desperate to find ways to be a victim. So desperate, in fact, that sometimes they fake their own victimhood. And I talked about that with Jussie Smollett. I mean, think about that. He faked a hate crime on himself, paid people to execute that. Why? Because he understands that if you go through something like that and you can cry racism, it actually increases your net worth, right? You get a bunch of scholarships and deals. And then think about what's his name, Colin Kaepernick got from the NFL, and just by getting on his knee and saying that he cared about Black lives, although everything he did fundamentally hurt Black lives. Black Lives Matter movement, there's nothing that kills Black Americans faster than the Black Lives Matter movement. You see one Black death, and I can guarantee you another 20 when they come protesting and knocking on doors, and more Black arrests, and so. For whatever reason, and actually that reason is because of the mainstream media narrative and all of the accolades and awards that are handed out when somebody says I'm a victim, people are now aspiring towards victimhood. I'm Black, I'm a woman, I'm disabled, I'm this, I'm that. These things used to be considered, maybe perhaps being disabled would be considered a hurdle, something that, okay, you know what, this perhaps disadvantages me in life, but here's how I'm going to conquer it. And people used to aspire to victorhood, right? I overcame this and still did this. Now people want to stay in the mode of being a victim and don't want to don't want to climb over anything or want to accomplish anything, because there's just so much to be earned if you sit there and marinate in why your life is so bad. Because
yeah, in fact, I want to ask you, Candace, if you think that this kind of victimhood's the new black it's not just for the Blacks in America. It's like victimhood. It's now part of the American experience. It's like you can't turn on a television show or a sporting event or what have you without, you always have to hear the background, the story of the challenge that somebody overcame because they were a victim. It just seems it's pervasive throughout the American culture now, isn't it?
it is. It is funny that you say that, because I was even noting that on shows that should have nothing to do with victimhood, thinking like Master Chef, right? They now want the story behind the person, and they want to hear something really sad, which is the reason why this person should win, not based off their cheeseburger that they made, but because I wanted to be a chef. I lost my mother last year, and suddenly now I'm realizing this has become a show that used to be fun to watch, and you just go, oh, this cheeseburger looks delicious, or that guy's cheeseburger is definitely going to win. Then the other person actually wins, and you're going, I mean, I can't taste it, but that one definitely doesn't look as good. The flavor profile is all here. And I'm going, wow, we've actually even transformed shows that were just supposed to be about fun and picking cheeseburgers, somehow now is about the victim story and the victim complex, because people are addicted to it right now. And it's not just amongst Black Americans. Of course, we are always the favored horse to bet on. It's extended to, a bunch of different other people, a bunch of different other demographics. Women, I think, probably since Hillary ran, that's been the new favored one. I'm a woman, Me Too, the Me Too movement, being a woman is so hard, the patriarchy, the toxicity of modern feminism has definitely picked up over the last 4 years, which is why I delve into that another chapter on feminism. And that will actually be my second book, is just blowing up that entire narrative.
Yeah, it's amazing. Does it make you want to laugh or cry that you've been defined by some as being a right-wing activist? I mean,
I am always laughing. I'm not a person that cries. And for me personally, when I see the left mischaracterize me or mischaracterize my intentions, I realize what an impact I'm having, because they go through such extremes. I mean, I have been called in articles a white supremacist. And I think when I see that, some people might get upset, but I say, wow, we're really getting close to exposing who they are, right? And exposing what they're about. When they start calling Black people white supremacists, that's a good sign and a bad sign, because it shows their desperation, and they reveal themselves faster than I ever could. So I am definitely, I think, best defined in the context of a happy warrior.
yeah, sure. How has it impacted your relationships or your ability to just operate with joy in the Black community? I mean, is it a tough, difficult thing because of how they might perceive how you've been positioned?
I think in the beginning it was frustrating, because they just will read an article that can be completely fictitious and they take it to be true. Something I never said, something I never did, but we're actually at the same time that the media is lying at an all-time high. We're also moving into a space and area where people don't even have the patience to read an article in its entirety or to go pursue information on their own. They just accept the headline as reality. But I think I've gotten, quite good at it. And what I mean by that is, if you have a sense of humor and you deal with people in a humorous way, they tend to respect you if you keep going. If you don't get angry, if you stay calm and you laugh. And then I have noticed over the last, I would say, especially year and a half, that people are just changing the page. And I have an entire army around me. I've been able to start an organization, the Blexit Foundation. We're in 33 states now. This is a minority Black American organization that is focused on bringing conservative principles into minority communities. That's an incredible feat, So right now I'm in a really good space. It was definitely difficult in the beginning with family. I definitely lost a couple of cousins who just could not wrap their head around it. And just felt that I had betrayed Black America. And that was probably the only real low point, because it was just so personal. And I grew up extremely close to my cousins. But I also just think God has a plan, and people wake up at different times. And my perspective is, I happened to wake up in, let's call it 2014. Some people might take a little bit longer. So give them time, and we're on the side of truth. We're on the side of God, and we're on the side of reality. And I think eventually everybody catches up to those perspectives.
Sure. I was going to ask a few questions of you of Blexit, because I see from the book really how important this organization is to you. And it reminded me of the, Newton's third law of physics is, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And I wondered, consciously or subconsciously, do you think that your Blexit and your formation of this was a reaction to the whole Black Lives Matter movement? Or, where did it come from? Does it have its origins there?
I actually think I started, I guess it would have been around the same time. So yes,
Yeah.
there is some godly design there, and we are antithetical to Black Lives Matter, proudly antithetical to Black Lives Matter. And our job is so easy, because you go in, you find a Black Lives Matter activist. They're being trained every day to be miserable, to be upset, to be outraged, to find nothing to be happy about, and to see themselves as victim. We come in with the antidote of, you can do it. You can do it. You're amazing. No matter what you've been through, you can go forward. That just feels better. That's a better prescription. So we, I think, have been able to, get the amount of press and attention that we've been able to get because of Black Lives Matter, right? So because Black Lives Matter is burning down a city, people need to know that not all Black people agree with this. And then they see this organization that is embracing American principles, that is saying they love their country, and that does not see themselves as enemies of white people or see white people as enemies of them, but all of us as, an American family. So yeah, I guess in a way I had never actually thought of that, but there was some precision, some mathematical precision behind the creation of Blexit that may
Yeah.
have been reduced down to simple physics.
Neat. Okay, so what role do you see for government, if any, in Blexit and what Blexit's trying to do? Is it just stay the hell out of the way? Is it, what role is there?
I am a person that believes in limited government. I believe, a terrorist comes over here and drops a bomb and blows up New York City. That is the role of our government, to protect us. Beyond that, let the people be free. And obviously there are some extents, limited government. Of course, there are some rules for government, but at the end, my core belief is that the more government gets involved, the more messed up things get. There is, who is the person? I don't want to misquote the president. I think it's Ronald Reagan. Correct me if I'm wrong. That says, the worst thing that you can hear is the government knock on the door and say, we're here to help." Right?
Yeah, that's right.
I believe
Yeah.
that. Every time the government tries to help, they hurt, and it ends up being a disaster. It's one of the core reasons why I support Donald J. Trump, because he believed in less regulation. He believed in shrinking government. We have departments upon departments upon departments of government. Nobody knows what they do, and they're taking tons of taxpayer money to do that nothing. And one of the biggest plagues of our society today is that the government is now seeking to replace the family structure, to make decisions for people, to tell people what they can say, what they can't do. And you're seeing this push in government. And I view conservatives as the last stand against that sort of invasion. In fact, in Scotland, one of the MPs, one of the members of parliament, had proposed a bill where you could sanction people for saying things that is considered hateful within their own homes. Implausible, right? Just the opposite of what I believe in. I believe people are better positioned to govern themselves, to make decisions for themselves, and that what we should be doing right now should be happening on a community level, and it should be about repairing families. And in terms of Black America, one of the biggest ills is our culture. Our culture is what leads to more government. Our culture of baby mamas, what we glorify in the media, women wearing less respectability. Our schools, which are now, rather than saying this is wrong, saying rather than teaching Black Americans English, let's make Ebonics a course. That's actually happening right now in public schools. Let's make people they shouldn't have to do that. That's white. That belongs to white people. I can think of nothing more dangerous and nothing that could lead to further disintegration faster than implementing these rotten structures within the school system. Yeah.
Speaking of President Reagan, recall this was the era, you were only this tall at the time, but the whole mantra about welfare queen and the concept of welfare to work, and in your book, you come straight out at it. It's, listen, welfare is one of the key things that has destroyed the Black community and the Black family. I know your answer could be 6 days long, but how would you distill if I said, well, what is the answer to the dissolution of the Black family in America?
Two answers. The government is obviously the dissolution of Black family was systemic. It happened because of welfare policies. The government, saying we will be the dad, incentivizing bad behavior. You have more kids, we'll give you more money, and it's your right. We should give this to you because of all these things we did in the past. Sort of repackaging and making it seem like it was reparations when it was the exact opposite of reparations. It was a destructive pattern that began, and Black women didn't marry the father of their children, and Black fathers felt delegitimatized. And so that sort of leads to the single motherhood rate that we have today. which is it's just incredible. 74% of Black kids are growing up not in a two-parent home. It's hard to wrap your head around that number when it was 23% before the government came to help, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing, though, is that even if you removed government, and you said, if you abolished welfare tomorrow, would Black families come together? No, because now we have a culture problem. We have a culture that glorifies that baby mama culture. When you listen to, and I talk about this in my last chapter on culture, the disintegration of Black culture and what I was listening to when I was a kid, people will say that you don't get Black culture. I'm not trying to get Black culture. I'm trying to take Black culture down. I think it's toxic and it's wrong. And it's been disintegrated over the last 2 decades, primarily. We were listening to the Temptations. We were singing about love, about family, the Jackson 5. This was fun, feel-good music. We are now singing about female genitalia, to encouraging women to have multiple partners and calling that feminism and calling that empowerment. It is not empowerment, and we have kids that are, dancing disgustingly, and it's all over Facebook and TikTok and the stuff that you see, and you go, my goodness, how could this have happened so quickly? And all of that's because it's culture. We glorify it, and these people are paid millions and millions of dollars to tell people that this is what they should, this is how they should act. And you want to talk about, Black Americans will always say, oh, the prison system and how many Black men are in prison, but no one will talk about the fact that hip hop music glorifies that. It's all about guns. It's all about gangsters. It's all about what you would do in a situation. It's about selling drugs. I believe, and that's why I quoted in what Confucius, the Chinese philosopher, said many, many, many years ago, that if you want to determine the morals of a society, its music will furnish the answer. And if you listen to predominantly, Black hip hop music, of course there are some exceptions, but as a rule, the furnished answer is that we have a destructive culture. Yeah, absolutely. Now, Blexit's a nonprofit. I think, as you said, now you're involved in 33 different states. As a nonprofit, what can people do to help you, Candace? I always say there's tons of ways to help. So if you're in a war, and I consider what we're in right now to be an ideological war, and everybody plays a different part in a war. Some people are the frontline soldiers. I think that's me. I take all the bullets, and I'm still here, and go home, get my wounds fixed, and get back to fight another day. We've obviously made it here because patriots and small donors have given money for us to be able to host our events in these inner cities, which have all been a success and all have been sold out. But we also have the people that are the writers. I mean, Blexit exists because we have people that wrote articles and told this person about it, and people who said, you know what, I'm not a writer, but what can I do? And I say, just sharing a video. If you go to the Blexit Facebook and you're following us and you share a video, we're creating an entire ecosystem. So I always say back to people, what can you do? If you're not the person that can finance it, can you volunteer? Can you get on the ground when we have an event? Can you hand out T-shirts? Are you just the person that sits behind your computer and hits share? Great. We need those people too. So we are in 33 states. Our biggest chapter, believe it or not, is in California, followed by Florida. And we are growing probably faster than we can at this moment, which is great. And it means that we've made a real impact. And just so you guys who don't know what Blexit does, we target the inner cities with conservative principles. We take head-on Black Lives Matter narrative. So this year, they were obsessed with the anti-police narrative. So across our chapter, in the 20 chapters that we had at the time when this narrative started, every weekend there was a Blue Lives Matter event in our inner cities where we brought inner city kids to police officers, had pizza parties, did blog parties and things of that nature to encourage that relationship that was being built, that was being destroyed by the mainstream media. We're just tremendously proud of what we've done. It all culminated finally in a 2,029 person Black and Latino march through Washington, which was called Back the Blue. And just to show people that this is not how all minorities think. In fact, all minorities are in fact being caricatured by the mainstream media.
Yeah, good on you. Prison reform, you talk about this some in your book, and I wonder, has the Trump administration, have they achieved all that you think is necessary, or is there more to be done?
I would actually say at this point, they're doing too much. They have done a lot. And at the end of the day, And I think Jared said it really well the other day, and he got killed for it in the media. Jared Kushner, I'm speaking about, where he said that the president can't want Black America to be better more than Black America wants to be better. And I think that we've gotten into this conditioning where it's, well, how is the government going to fix Black America? And my challenge for Black Americans is, how is Black America going to fix Black America? We have to stop looking for policies, and that is the great irony, that a community of people who acknowledged the fact that it was a government that enslaved them, a government that segregated them, now thinks that the government is going to be good for them, that more government is going to be good for them. And I preach and teach the exact opposite. I am not a big believer that government should fix things. I think that Trump has made more efforts than any president, any modern president, or any president ever, maybe since Abraham Lincoln, to help the Black community. He says that often, and I think he's exactly right. But at this point, what we're facing right now is the fact that Black Americans have gotten comfortable with saying, what is the government going to do for us because of this, because of slavery, even though not a single breathing Black American was ever a slave, and not a single breathing white American was ever a slave owner. So we need to change that mentality and start asking Black America, what can it do for itself?
Sure. Beyond having a very sharp mind, my sense is one of your foremost qualities is you have courage. And I wonder, what advice would you give, Candace, to whether it's Black Americans, white Americans, Hispanic Americans? They didn't all have they didn't have the luck of having your grandfather. So how do they summon courage in themselves to do the right thing, as you'd suggest it would be?
I get this question often, and I have an answer, and it's one word. It comes down to one word, and it's perspective. I don't have courage. What I have is perspective. And I get so often people say, oh, if I spoke out and I said something, I'd be called a racist. Or if I spoke out and I said something, I'd be called this, or I'd lose my friends. And I always just ask them to draw upon their ancestors a couple of generations ago and ask what a day was like in their life. And so it's easy for me. My grandfather's still alive. I know he lived through real segregation. And I imagine myself getting completely flustered because somebody sent me a mean tweet, or I have to read a headline because someone called me a white supremacist, and being that I was really living through suffering. We are all so privileged. And that includes white Americans. I speak often about World War II people. If you had, those boys, the average age 22, crossing the English Channel, throwing up, crying for their mothers on the way to be almost sure, that they were going to be slaughtered on the Omaha beaches. That's what they lived through. That's what they had to go through a bad day. You have to go through maybe one of your friends defriending you, right? Our job is actually remarkably easy. Speak up and speak out, and just have that perspective and realize that we are the most privileged people that have ever lived on the face of the planet. Yeah.
You have a chapter on feminism, which I really found fascinating. And in it, I would quote you as saying, you've not been discriminated against. In fact, in modern life now, you've been discriminated for. Explain that.
It is just the truth. You can look at virtually every statistic, and women are doing better than men. This narrative that the patriarchy is keeping us down is completely made up and fictitious. And I encourage people to thoroughly read economists who have debunked this thousands and thousands of times about the wage gap. The wage gap is it's completely made up. If women take on the same career paths as men, unless you fall into the category of people who believe that somebody who picks out handbags for Vogue should be paid the same amount as an oral surgeon, then you have to acknowledge it's not a wage gap, it's an interest gap. And there are biological underpinnings for those interest gaps, which is what I'm working on in my second book. I am 8 months pregnant. My entire life, and as much as I have accomplished, is about to change because I have been designed by God in a way that I can carry children, and there is so much that comes with that, so much desire that comes with that, and we've allowed people to tell us that men have it easy. I mean, I look at my husband sometimes when he's on the phone with lawyers for me, just go, I don't want to be you. I don't envy you. I love being a woman so much. There's a pressure that's on men. They have a shorter life expectancy, a higher suicide rate. They are graduating college at a lower rate than women, and all this is because men have this remarkable stress. When there's an emergency, nobody calls a feminist. You know what I mean? These world wars I'm talking about that we put an end to. Yes, of course you can say, oh, X amount of women stepped up and and maybe they were nurses and things of that nature, but those men were the ones who went up and got their body parts blown apart, and that stays that way. There's nothing barring women today from signing up, and going to have that happen to them. There's a reason that men kind of go towards that career more often than women. So we have biological realities that underpin virtually all the decisions that we make, and modern feminists try to pretend it doesn't exist. I'm a proud non-feminist. I don't envy men. I respect men, and I respect our differences. And I believe that there is a beautiful yin and a yang, and it needs to remain that way.
Yeah. You have a beautifully titled chapter in your book, which I loved, it's called Over Civilization. Can you explain that concept?
Yes, I came up with that all by myself. And I was like, it was very hard when I was writing. I was like, how can I transfer this from my brain onto these pages? I do believe that when you actually reach peace, what does a society do once you actually reach a state of peace where things are basically good? Like today, we're privileged, we're doing well. Well, I think inside of us, the human spirit seeks to triumph. We want to say that we did something. We want to say we put an end to World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War. My generation did this. And unfortunately, we're living in a time, if you're a millennial like me or the ages beneath, where there really isn't much for us to do because things are so good. And so we're actually now looking for various oppressions and oppressing ourselves in the process. And we're taking on these meaningless social justice pursuits to fill that void within ourselves. We've got everything. We're just so privileged. I mean, everything. Imagine just telling my grandfather about smartphones, the concept of that, when he'd have to walk 10 miles to get where he wanted to get. And the idea of just even food delivery on your phone. We're just so privileged. And yet we're not happy and content with that privilege because we seek triumph. And so we create issues where they don't exist. We're basically setting fires and then going out and trying to take them out. And that is actually what happens. That's over civilization. We've reached civilization. Things are civilized. So now let's over civilize it, and it leads to these regressive arguments and these regressive issues. And now we're debating suddenly bathroom signs because there's just nothing to be upset about. And just imagine during something like the Great Depression, someone's like, but the bathroom signs, it just would never happen because there was real suffering, So that's kind of my concept on over civilization.
Got it. Yeah, it's a neat one. Yeah, keep it up. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the election, but more about the future. First, do you think this race is over? Do you think we're staring at President Biden?
I think what we're looking at is how hard is the GOP and the Republicans willing to fight. We know there was election fraud. We've seen censorship like we've never seen it. I called election fraud in March when the COVID-19 narrative made no sense. I'm always a bit ahead of the curve. And I just said, none of this makes sense. The death rates are going down, and yet they're getting more restrictive, and they want there to be this sense of fear so they can justify mailing out a bunch of, ballots. I mean, I literally tweeted this in March, and now it's become a reality, and people are realizing dead people are registered, votes were sent, 200,000 votes were sent to the wrong address in Pennsylvania, and all of these things have happened. And we've never seen an election, and only in a socialist country, a communist country, you see an election that goes on for days and days until the winner that they want to win wins. This is a mirage of a democratic process, and it should terrify everybody. And I know people like me have been shouting about this. People like Tom Fitt and Judicial Watch have been shouting about this for months and months. And I think now people are realizing, oh my goodness, it's here. Socialism has arrived on the shores of America. It has arrived in our school system. It is Marxism being taught in our school. And our election has been run in a way that you would expect it to happen in Venezuela under Chavez. It's exactly what happened. It took days and days to get the election result that they wanted. And you're hearing a lot of Cuban Americans speak out that it's reminiscent of that process for them. I don't know how this ends. I think the right man is in office to deal with it. And I think that Donald Trump is a fighter. And I am scared to consider the alternative of a Biden presidency when we know the positions that he stands on are virtually none, and he's willing to hand off his power to any other person to do as they will. So it's something to watch. I think China is very involved in America. That's just my perception at the moment. But we will see, and we will pray.
Yeah. You remarked in your book early on when President Trump, can't recall if he was a candidate at the time or not, but when he said to the Black community, look, what do you have to lose? How, in your mind, did the Black community respond to that question in this election? I heard yesterday that maybe twice as many Black women supported the president this time around, but I don't know any of the other statistics, but what do you think occurred?
Double the amount of Black women and even more Black men supported the president. And what occurred was they just needed to hear a different perspective. And that's what we were provided. This is why I exist. I knew that I could circumvent the mainstream media narrative of Black people being oppressed, and I've been able to do that through the power of social media to get around the mainstream narrative about what it means to be a Black person, host events. And like I said, over these last 2 years, my following has boomed, and there's been a lot of Black Americans. So I knew that change was possible. When I first announced Brexit, I was laughed at. People said there will never be a Black exit. Black Americans will never turn, especially to Trump. Well, now Trump has received more of the Black vote than any GOP candidate since 1960. That's incredible stuff. And he did this in spite of being called a racist more than any person more than any president in American history. And that's a profound statement because there were actual racists in the White House, right? Who used the N-word openly and who didn't care, LBJ being the biggest one. And yet Trump was able to do that because of not just me, but the people that have been inspired by me, who have opened their YouTube channels to talk about conservative principles. That's why I exist. I always hope that in seeing me in the front and seeing me be unapologetic in my approach, it gives other Black Americans the permission. In the same way that for Trump, being unapologetically conservative and loving America and hugging flags gave other patriots the permission. It takes that sort of, those sort of characters, I think, throughout history to let people know that it's okay to be you. You don't have to be something that someone else is telling you to be. You aren't hurting anybody by loving your country, and you certainly aren't hurting anybody by being a Black conservative.
Yeah. Let's go to the opposite end of the spectrum, to the extreme. If a President Biden exists, do you think this concept of reparations could become a reality? And if so, what's your view on it?
It won't become a reality because it's just more left election talk. This is why they say we're putting together a commission to talk about reparations. It's just a conversation, and maybe it'll end up being another way to take taxpayer money so that this commission can keep talking about reparations. But the truth is that it's impossible. We are such a mix. How are you going to separate the white Americans who freed the slaves from the white Americans who owned slaves? Right? What are you going to do? Is this going to be like genealogy? I mean, are we going to start taking blood samples and say, you were related to this guy, and you were related to that guy? It's just an impossible hurdle. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. At the same time, you have Black Americans born in Black America that did your family actually descend from slavery? I mean, where did you come from? Maybe your family's 2 generations ago and came from Africa, and you were never enslaved by Americans. So if you think that our government is organized to figure all of that out and we can't even get an election done correctly, you're out of your minds. So this is just going to be more, talk, and there will be no action. But it's always the bait on the hook in election cycles is we're going to give you this, we're going to give you that. And then, of course, none of it ever comes to fruition. And even if it did, I would reject it because it's absolutely ridiculous for people that were never slaves to take money from people that never had slaves. It's fraudulent, it's wrong. And in my opinion, it's not what America is about. Everybody in this country has been victimized, including the Irish. I mean, Irish need not apply. Remember, when they came over here, they were considered a plague. Chinese people, Japanese people, various groups have been discriminated against, but only one group gets talked about. So in that way, I think I have a certain level of Black privilege that other groups don't.
Got it. Second to the last question. You mentioned social media and the progress that I think, the traction that actually you're getting in your message through social media. Do you see a day when the power of social media and the power of individuals to use social media will end up outweighing the predominance of the mainstream media, or is that a pipe dream?
That day is today. I mean, that is why tech is censoring people and why they're trying to remove people from their platforms. 2016 was the year that became a reality, when Donald Trump was able to get around the mainstream media narrative about himself and get a bunch of Americans to vote for him. That happened because of social media and Twitter. He did that all by himself on Twitter. And that's incredible. And since then, they have been losing their minds trying to figure out how to stop that, how to censor and silence voices like mine. They've now got the fact checkers, which are comprised of regular people who just disagree with your opinion. And this sort of stuff is happening as a response to the fact that someone like me can go on Facebook and make a video and get 100 million views worldwide. I did that when I did my George Floyd video, and it completely crumbled the mainstream media narrative that this guy, was just about to become the Pope, and something terrible happened. And so they understand that power, and they want to erase that power. And the tech censorship is going to be the next big fight in America.
Yeah. Last question, Candace. Just for a minute, speak to white America, okay? If white America had the one single question for you that said, Candace, what can I do as a white person to support, to help the Black community? What would you say?
I would say, please stop helping us.
That's what I thought.
I would say I do not view it as my responsibility to help you because you're white, and it should not be your responsibility to help me because I'm Black. And the reason you feel that way is because of social conditioning that took place. You are psychologically traumatized from school to believe that somehow we are your responsibility. And I talk about that psychological trauma kind of starting in the mid-60s after the acknowledgement that, yes, we did something wrong, which obviously segregation was extremely wrong. And people that partook in that were equally wrong, but being told it was okay by their own government. But you guys have no part in that. I did not live under that. There is nothing for you to do to correct any wrongs. I have to want to make my life good. I can, as a Black woman, I can do anything that you can do as a white person in this country. I'm proof of that. I've started 2 businesses. Despite coming from an impoverished background, I'm able to accomplish that all by my own. I was able to get married to a white man because miscegenation laws were struck down a long time ago. There's nothing you can do. And that also includes you cannot make me want good for my life. Even if you did cut me a reparation check, would I know what to do with it? I always say that the education system is so bad that if today the government said, you know what, every Black person is going to get 10 acres and a mule, you'd be shocked to see how many Black people would lose that property in 10 years because we're not learning economics, we're not learning financial management, we're learning how to be emotional, we're learning how to be angry. And so please do nothing. White America, except stop suffering from white guilt, because it's one of the greatest plagues in American society today.
Yeah, well, I'm glad I asked the question. Candace Owens, a terrific book, and I can't thank you enough for spending time with us. And just know that when this plague is behind us, you're invited. We hope you'll find your way out to the Reagan Library at some point, because we'd be honored to welcome you here.
Thank you so much. This was such a lovely conversation, and I would love to meet you guys in person as soon as this plague has wiped us all from the face of the planet.
Thank you, Candace. Take care of yourself.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
We hope this conversation has inspired you to share what you've learned with your family and friends, and that you'll join us again for an upcoming event.
And let me offer lesson number 1 about America. All great change in America begins at the dinner table. So tomorrow night in the kitchen, I hope the talking begins. And children, if your parents haven't been teaching you what it means to be an American, let them know and nail them on it. That would be a very American thing to do.